It started on one of those nights where you're desperate to finish everything before the work week kicks in. My washing machine had broken down a couple of days before, and the pile of dirty clothes was getting out of hand. I had no choice but to take it all to the 24-hour laundromat a few blocks away from my apartment. The place wasn't anything special, just a small, dingy laundry shop with a few machines, a fluorescent light that flickered non-stop, and a couple of cracked plastic chairs in the corner. The kind of place people only visit when they have to. It was close to midnight when I got there, and as expected, the shop was empty. That was fine with me. I wanted to get in, do my laundry, and get out as quickly as possible. I loaded up one of the machines, poured in the detergent, and sat down, pulling out my phone to pass the time. As the machine whirred to life, I realized how eerily quiet the shop was. The hum of the washing machines was the only sound, and outside, the street was dead silent. The laundromat's big windows gave me a clear view of the empty street and the distant streetlights, flickering in the darkness. Everything seemed normal at first. I was halfway through a video on my phone when I heard it, a soft thudding sound. It came from one of the other machines. I glanced up, thinking maybe I had misheard, but there it was again, a dull thump coming from the back of the laundromat, near the older machines. I looked around, expecting to see someone else, but the place was still empty. I brushed it off, assuming one of the older machines was just malfunctioning. They didn't get much use anymore, and it wasn't unusual for them to make strange noises. But then it happened again, louder this time, thump, 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 like something was pounding from inside the machine. Curiosity got the better of me. I stood up and walked toward the back of the shop, where the old machines sat in a row, unused and covered in dust. One of them was shaking slightly, as though it were in the middle of a wash cycle. But no one had touched it, and it hadn't been working when I came in. My first instinct was to leave, but something pulled me closer. I stepped up to the machine, my heart starting to race. The thumping noise was coming from inside, louder and more insistent now, like someone or something was trapped in there. I knelt down and peered through the small circular window of the washing machine door. The inside was dark, and the glass was smeared with old stains, but I could make out a shape moving. At first, I thought it was just a piece of clothing tumbling around, but then I saw it. Something pale and small, almost like a hand, pressing against the inside of the glass. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, my heart racing. There was no possible way anyone could be inside that machine. But the knocking continued, growing more frantic. Thump, thump, thump. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just knew I had to open it to see what was inside. I twisted the handle, expecting to find, I don't know, a prank? A trick? The door swung open, and the machine stopped with a sharp, mechanical whine. Inside, there was nothing, just an empty, dark drum. I stared into the empty machine, my mind struggling to process what I had just seen, or thought I had seen. The thumping had been so real, so loud, but there was nothing inside. No clothes, no movement, nothing. I stood up, backing away slowly. My own machine was still running, and the steady hum of the laundromat returned. I tried to tell myself it was just a malfunction, that I was tired and imagining things. But then, just as I was about to sit back down, the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't stop. The entire shop plunged into darkness for a moment before the lights snapped back on, casting a sickly yellow glow over everything. And that's when I heard the whisper. It was faint, barely audible at first, but unmistakable. It was coming from the back of the shop, near the old machines. A soft, cold voice, speaking words I couldn't understand. My skin prickled. I stood frozen in place, listening as the voice grew louder, more distinct. It was as if someone was standing right behind me, breathing the words directly into my ear. Without thinking, I turned and ran for the door. I reached the door, grabbing the handle and yanking it open. The cool night air hit me, and I stumbled outside, my heart pounding in my chest. I stopped, leaning against the wall of the shop, trying to catch my breath. But when I looked back through the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Inside the laundromat, standing right in front of the machines, was a figure. It was pale, almost translucent, with long, dark hair dripping wet. The figure wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at the washing machine I had opened. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, staring back at it. But eventually, I snapped out of it, jumped in my car, and sped off without a second glance. I never went back to that laundromat. I never told anyone what I saw that night, but I know what I experienced. And I know I wasn't alone in that place. Whatever was in that machine, it was still there, and it wasn't finished. It was a habit I had gotten into, doing my laundry late at night. The laundry shop near my apartment was open 24 hours, and I found it peaceful to go when no one else was around. I didn't mind the silence, and it was better than competing for machines during the busy hours. One night, after an especially long day at work, I decided to head to the laundromat at my usual time, just past midnight. The air was cool, the streets quiet. The laundromat itself was brightly lit, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing softly overhead. It was empty, just like I liked it. I set up my clothes in one of the newer machines, started the cycle, and sat down with my phone to pass the time. As the rhythmic sound of the washing machine filled the air, I relaxed, scrolling through social media. Then, about halfway through the cycle, I realized something strange. There was a single sock, bright red, sitting on top of one of the older machines in the back. I hadn't noticed it before, but it caught my attention because it was so out of place. The laundromat was always spotless, and I had never seen clothes left behind like that. It looked freshly laundered, the fabric still vibrant in the dim light. I shrugged it off. People forget things all the time in places like this. I went back to my phone, trying to ignore the odd sense of discomfort creeping in. But that feeling didn't go away. In fact, it only got stronger. As the machine hummed along, I found myself glancing back at the sock every few minutes, almost subconsciously. It didn't move, didn't change, but it felt like it was calling to me. Maybe it was the bright color, standing out so starkly in the otherwise dull environment. At some point, I got up to stretch my legs and decided to check out the sock up close. Maybe it was silly, but curiosity got the best of me. I walked over to the old machine in the back and reached out to pick it up. But when my hand touched the fabric, it felt wrong. Damp, almost cold, as if it hadn't just been washed and forgotten but soaked in something else. I quickly dropped it, wiping my hand on my pants, the weird sensation lingering on my fingers. I backed away from the machine, shaking my head, and returned to my seat. I wanted to finish my laundry and get out of there as soon as possible. But when I glanced back, the sock was gone. I blinked, staring at the top of the machine where the sock had been sitting. It wasn't there anymore. I hadn't heard anyone come in, and I definitely didn't see anyone move it. I stood up, my heart racing. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in the air. Something cold, something watching. I quickly gathered my clothes from the washer, shoving them into a dryer just to finish and leave. The shop, which had once felt like a quiet sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The air was thick, heavy with an unsettling energy. As the dryer spun, the lights in the shop flickered, briefly plunging the room into darkness. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself it was just a power surge, nothing to worry about. But the flickering continued, the lights struggling to stay on, casting eerie shadows across the room. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, near the same old machines in the back, a figure stood just outside the reach of the dim light. It was faint, almost see-through, like a misty outline of a person. I couldn't make out any details, just a vague shape. But it was there, watching me. I took a step back, my body frozen in place. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring. And then, slowly, the red sock reappeared, lying on the floor directly in front of the old machines. The air in the room grew colder. I could feel my breath hitch, my skin prickling. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. I was trapped, stuck in place by the sheer terror of what was happening. The lights flickered again, and in that brief flash of darkness, the figure moved. Closer. Finally, my legs responded, and I bolted toward the dryer, grabbing my clothes in a rush, not caring that they were still damp. I didn't care. I just needed to leave. As I reached the door, the lights flickered one more time, and the figure appeared again, this time right in front of the door. Its form was clearer now, a shadowy figure with no discernible face, but with arms stretched out as if to block my way. I stopped short, my heart slamming against my chest. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold and empty. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. The lights stopped flickering, and the air in the room warmed slightly. Everything went back to normal. I didn't wait. I ran out of the laundromat and didn't stop until I was safely inside my car. The doors locked. I drove home in a daze. The image of the shadowy figure burned into my mind. I've never been back to that laundromat since. I take my clothes to a different place now, somewhere far away from that shop. I don't know what I saw that night, but I know one thing for sure. Something unnatural haunts that laundromat. Something that waits for anyone foolish enough to visit after dark. It was a Sunday evening, and I was running late with my chores. I had spent most of the weekend lounging, procrastinating, and before I knew it, the pile of dirty laundry had grown monstrous. I didn't have a washing machine at home, so I packed everything into an oversized laundry bag and headed to the laundromat down the street. It was one of those old places with rows of machines that seemed to have been there for decades. Their once shiny surfaces now dull and scratched from years of use. The laundromat itself had this eerie vibe, especially in the evenings. The lights always seemed a little too dim, and the sound of the machines rumbling gave the place a strange, otherworldly atmosphere. I arrived just as the sun was setting, the last few rays of daylight disappearing as I pushed the door open. The laundromat was empty, just as I expected. I dumped my bag into one of the machines and started the cycle, settling into one of the cracked plastic chairs to wait. The laundromat wasn't exactly comforting. Its flickering lights and the constant hum of machines were unsettling, to say the least. But I was used to it. What else could you do when you didn't have a washer at home? As I waited, I noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. One of the dryers, an old rusty thing in the back, was slowly turning, despite no one having put any clothes inside. I frowned, getting up to take a closer look. The dryer door was slightly ajar, and yet the machine was spinning as if it were full of clothes. There was a faint sound coming from inside. At first, I thought it was just the normal tumbling of fabric. But as I leaned closer, I realized it was something else entirely. It was whispering. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. Soft, almost like a breath, but with a rhythmic tone, as if someone or something was speaking in a hushed, hurried voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the sound sent chills down my spine. I stepped back quickly, feeling my heart race. I glanced around the laundromat, but it was still empty. No one had come in while I wasn't looking. It was just me and that whispering dryer. I shook my head, trying to convince myself that it was all in my imagination. Maybe the machine was just malfunctioning, or maybe I was just tired from a long weekend of avoiding responsibilities. But then, the dryer door creaked open, just an inch wider, as if inviting me to look inside. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the dryer. I should have left right then, but something compelled me to stay, to find out what was inside. I slowly approached the machine and pulled the door open. To my surprise, there was something inside. It wasn't empty after all. It was my old laundry bag, the same one I had been using for years, but I was sure I hadn't put it in there. I had loaded my clothes directly into the washer at the front of the laundromat. Yet here it was, sitting in the dryer, as if it had been waiting for me. I reached in to grab it, but as soon as my fingers touched the fabric, the whispering stopped. The laundromat fell silent, the hum of the machines suddenly feeling too loud in the eerie stillness. I yanked the bag out and stumbled back, my heart pounding. Something was wrong. I could feel it, Something was off about the entire situation. The laundromat felt different now, darker, as if the shadows in the corners had grown thicker, more oppressive. I quickly walked back to my seat, clutching the laundry bag. I didn't want to open it, but something in me knew I had to. I sat down, unzipped the bag, and looked inside. The bag was empty. My hands shook as I stared into the empty bag. It didn't make sense. I had just pulled it from the dryer, and it should have been full of clothes. But there was nothing inside, just a hollow, dark void. I zipped the bag up again, trying to calm my breathing. I needed to get out of there. I stood up, ready to grab my clothes from the washer and leave. But when I looked over, the washer had stopped. The door was open, and my clothes were gone. Panic set in. I rushed over to the machine, frantically searching inside. Nothing. Not a single sock or shirt remained. It was as if my laundry had disappeared, swallowed up by the laundromat itself. I backed away slowly, clutching the empty laundry bag to my chest. The laundromat had grown colder, and the air felt thick, suffocating. I could hear the faint whispering again, this time all around me, like the walls themselves were speaking. I didn't wait any longer. I dropped the laundry bag and ran for the door, my footsteps echoing through the silent shop. I burst outside into the cool night air, my heart racing as I stumbled away from the building. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. That night, I threw out my old laundry bag. I couldn't bring myself to keep it, not after what happened. I found a new laundromat, one that felt safer, warmer. But I'll never forget that night. The whispers, the empty machines, and the bag that appeared where it shouldn't have been. I never figured out what happened to my clothes. And to this day, I wonder if they're still trapped in that laundromat, spinning endlessly in the machines, caught in some kind of cycle that I narrowly escaped.